We have witnessed the climate crisis, but we have also witnessed the climate movements, activists, and agreements that have given us hope that we can, in fact, tackle this great crisis. One of such movements is the Climate Reality Project, led by former US Vice President Al Gore. Through training campaigns and partnerships, the project has given people the tools and network to take on and win climate battles with local, national, and global consequences. The climate reality training happens every year, and three shapers from the Kathmandu hub were a part of this training in 2020. Today, we'll be conversing with two of those shapers who will take us through their journey of climate reality training and provide some valuable insights on the ongoing climate crisis. So let's welcome both of them. First up, we have Mohit Rauniyar, who is the co-founder and director of Canopy Nepal, a social enterprise working to create educational accessibility for underprivileged students and to promote interactive learning in classrooms in Nepal. He has been in the education field for the past 9 years and has reached more than 5,500 students through his sessions. Our second speaker is Srishti Vaidya, who is the finance director of Vaidya Group, a conglomerate of many different companies with a shared goal to develop Nepal and place it prominently in the world map. Srishti is also the founder of Kathmandu Book Club, which was established a year and a half ago and now has more than 50 active members. Let's welcome both of them with a huge round of virtual applause. We will begin with a short presentation by Mohit and Srishti, which will then be followed by Q&A with the moderator, that is me, and then the audience. So Srishti and Mohit, lead us away.
So as Sadiksha said, Al Gore is the person who started the Climate Reality Project, and this was a 3-4 day training session. Oh wait, I think it was longer than that. Training session. We went through, I think, 500 plus slides, which told us a lot about climate change. There was a lot of information, but we wanted you all to have a glimpse of what we saw throughout those days of training. So we've condensed those 500 plus slides into a 5 to 10 minute presentation. So I hope you'll enjoy it. Let's jump right into it. So when we talk about climate change, this is something that we always see, Earth's radiations coming into our atmosphere, greenhouse gases trapping it. And then we learn that too much greenhouse gas and we trap more solar radiation, which leads to climate change. This is something that we all have seen at one point in our lives. But the important thing is that we need to understand the extent of the damage. And so to understand that, here's some information from NASA. So the energy trapped by man-made global warming pollutions is equivalent to exploding 500,000 first-generation atomic bombs every single day in our atmosphere, every single day of the year. So this gives you an idea of the amount of damage that we're doing to our atmosphere. I had some fun with the animations here. 19 of the 20 hottest years on record have occurred since the year 2001. So you can see here all the years highlighted in orange are our record-breaking hottest years on record. And I don't know about 2020. I don't know if that information has come out yet, but I'm pretty sure it's right up there with all these other years. And so what are the impacts? I just want to go briefly over this. We'll talk about this much more in our Q&A session. But just some of the really important things that I want to cover. The first would be food. Food is such a basic necessity. We all need it. And looking at this graph, from the year 1965 to 2019, look at Asia right there, the amount of deficit we already have in terms of food. And this is only going to get worse and worse and worse due to climate change. You can see that through this next graph, slide, where for every 1 degree increase in the global temperature, the yield to the productivity of wheat, rice, corn, and soy decreased significantly. And so for 1 degree increase in, say, next year in our planet, rice production will decrease by 3.2%. And rice and wheat and corn, these are some really important crops for Nepal specifically. And these are things that are happening now. It's not in the future. It's something that's already happening to us. Also, another basic necessity for all humans is water. Um, as the temperatures rise, so does water usage. And so the more water we use, the more scarcity there is. And in Nepal specifically, agriculture needs 70% of the water use that we have is in agriculture. And having a scarcity of that and then getting into a vicious cycle in not having water, using more water, then not having water, that's just going to get worse and worse and worse as our temperatures increase. This is another piece of information that might be really interesting to you. For every 1 degree increase in 1 degree Celsius increase in temperature at the equator, you would think that this is like a uniform increase throughout the planet, but no. In the poles, it's actually 3 times more. And so, one really important thing is that the poles, we have all these ice that reflects solar radiation, which means that we are bouncing back all of those solar radiations into space. But now that temperatures are increasing, those ice caps that are melting, that means that we're absorbing more solar radiation, which means that we're not radiating out the solar radiations, and then more of the ice caps are going. So it's a vicious cycle once again. And an effect of this you can see with this information here is that the rate of ice melt in the Himalayas has doubled since the year 2000. So that's not really far back. It was 21 years ago. It's already doubled. And according to the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, between 1/3 or 2/3 of the Himalayan glaciers will melt by the end of the century. It's not an if or, it's definitely will. And just the amount depends on how quickly we can reduce emissions or how much we do emit in the future. And to give perspective on that, these glaciers, our glaciers, provide water to approximately 1/4 of the world's population. So we're effectively saying that by the end of the century, a quarter of the world's population would probably not have fresh water source. The IPCC also forecasts that there will be a rise in temperature of 2.5 to 10 degrees over the next century. So you can see that's a consequence. The glaciers melting is a consequence of that. And what does this really mean for us? This is a really interesting image right here. This is a map of our world as it is right now. And those little black bits are places that are completely uninhabitable right now. So you can see a bit of Africa and then maybe some parts of India, but not much. But the next image you see will be just 50 years from now, not that far away, in our lifetimes, hopefully. The amount of uninhabitable land is increasing significantly, and Nepal is also right there with it. So right now, people think Nepal is like a heaven, a place to really enjoy living in, but it's not going to be so when we're old, in our old age. We're probably going to have to migrate further up north. And as you can see also, this belt of countries that we're seeing that would be affected are countries that are mostly underdeveloped or still developing. And this is going to be worse, right? Because it's not rich countries that are going to have to migrate. It's people who are already struggling to life. It's an added problem of climate change that they'll be facing. And last but not least, air pollution, something so pertinent to us in Nepal. Air pollution kills 9 million people every single year. And in Nepal, the number, according to one study, is around 35,000 to 37,000 people die due to diseases born through air pollution. And just to give perspective on that, the COVID pandemic has taken the lives of 2 million people so far over a year. So air pollution is deadly. It's really, really deadly, and we need to realize this. Here's another set of pictures. So when I first saw these pictures, I thought this was the California wildfires. That's all over social media. Everyone's seen it. And so I thought this is just another set of images that I would see until I realized these are actually pictures from Nepal, from the Manang district. And these are wildfires that are happening right now, this very moment. And our government has been unable to control them. The fire has been happening, I believe, since the 26th of November from 2020. And it's still raging. We've lost 700 hectares of land, of trees, of forest cover, of wildlife due to these fires. And it's mainly because a lot of these are man-made fires, but it's made worse because there's a specific dry spell that we're not used to, our country's not used to, and so we're more likely to get these wildfires more and more in the future. Now Mohit is going to take over and talk about some of the positive news about the future, about climate change, instead of giving you all of the negative news. So Mohit, take it away.
Thank you, Srishti. Hello, everybody. Srishti talked a little bit about the basics of climate change, the consequences of it. So let me talk about a big question: can we change? Let me start with this very interesting fact. Globally, wind could supply worldwide electricity consumption 40 times over. So this just gives us a glimpse of how wind, a renewable energy, can substitute these traditional energies and can lead a world to a better future. Moving ahead, this picture from Sweden, this steel mill in operation since 1604 has produced the world's first fossil-free steel using hydrogen for heat. Again, hydrogen can be another alternative energy source that can replace coal or gas, and again, another positive sign for us. Moving ahead, this news from back in June 1956 suggested that Britain will fail without coal, right? But about a year and a half ago, The Guardian reported that Great Britain recorded 2 weeks of coal-free electricity generation. So this gives us a glimpse of how there has been a big perspective change in the energy world, and how Britain, that thought, coal, Britain without coal was not possible, has actually become a reality now. Talking a little bit about solar energy progress. In 2002, scientists projected that the solar energy market will grow 1 gigawatt per year by 2010. But guess what? The reality is quite different. The reality is that this goal was exceeded by 121 times, which is excellent. It's a great news that we have. This next information that when I was reading made me truly happy, because I did not know this before, but we get enough solar energy from the sun that reaches Earth every hour to fill all the world's energy needs for a full year. So if there's any way we can store and utilize this solar energy, we can see how we can, in the coming days, replace all the traditional energy sources. Moving ahead, talking a little bit about solar and electricity. In 2014, electricity from solar and wind was cheaper than new coal and gas plants in approximately 1% of the world. Just 5 years later, in 2019, solar and wind provided the cheapest sources of new electricity in 2/3 of the world. Great progress, right? But within the next 5 years, these sources are expected to provide the cheapest new electricity in the entire world. Again, another positive news. Let me shift a little bit to electric vehicles, because I hope we're going to talk about this in our conversation in a few minutes. In September, more than 60% of new cars sold in Norway were electrical. So this information from the World Economic Forum suggested how Norway is setting an example for the entire world to actually move to electric vehicles rather than the traditional ones. Let me quickly touch upon Nepal a little bit. So Nepal only contributes 0.02% to the global greenhouse emissions. But sad thing is, we come fourth on the list of countries most vulnerable to the impact of climate change. We're seeing drought, we're seeing excessive rainfall, we're seeing floods, landslides, melting glacier, and it is something that is very palpable for all of us. And the sad thing is, this will affect the communities with poor socioeconomic status the most. Towards the end, I just want to read out one very important statement, which suggests that Nepal is still not on track to achieve the Paris commitments. I mean, this should be a reality check for all of us. We've talked about the past, we've talked about the present, we've even shown a little bit of the future, but it depends on us. And the time to change is not tomorrow, it's not day after, it's not sometime in the future, but the time to change is right now, because the world depends on us. Now I would like to hand the stage back, the digital stage back to Sadiksha.
Thank you, Mohit and Srishti. I think you both deserve a huge round of applause. Like I mentioned, if you can switch on your videos, please do so. And if you are in a noise-free background, do unmute yourself. And let's give a huge round of applause to the both of them. I think that was really enlightening as well as alarming presentation that showed us how we will be impacted by climate change. But I think it also showed, I think it gave us hope that things are possible and that we need to make the change right now. Thank you so much for that presentation, both Srishti and Mohit. So now moving on to our questions. In the presentation, you mentioned that the climate crisis will most impact those who are most vulnerable. I mean, that is for sure. Can you please elaborate this and also explain this in the context of Nepal? Like, what is the situation? Yeah.
Let me take it,
Yeah.
Srishti. So when I first heard about the intersection between climate change and vulnerable communities, I was honestly very surprised, but I don't know why I was surprised because generally whenever something bad happens, it is people from underprivileged communities that are suffering because of people at the top, right? Be it natural disaster, lack of opportunities, injustice, or even climate change, right? So because of climate change, people coming from low income communities, communities of color, and other vulnerable populations are the ones that are on the receiving end mostly. Talking a little bit about the hurricanes in Texas, Puerto Rico, Florida, and the infamous wildfire in California in the past, 4 or 5 years, there was a research done that suggested that low-income communities and communities of color were the one getting affected the most, simply because they didn't have the resources, simply because they didn't have the capacity to prepare for and recover from these extreme climate events. I was also, while preparing for this presentation, this conversation, I was also looking into the fourth National Climate Assessment that was talking a little bit about the inequality that exists in the world. And because of these climate change, this inequality is just going to get worse. And the report also emphasized on the need that the government officials have to involve people from low income residents while they're developing climate solutions. Talking a little bit about Nepal to connect to your question, just like I suggested, we are only contributing a mere 0.027% to the entire global greenhouse emission, right? Yet we're on fourth when it comes to being the most vulnerable country because of climate change. And climate change is actually something that we really feel right now. We saw what's going on. I was also reading this report published by IPCC back in 2016, where they were talking how elderly, widows, disabled people, people from local communities, women, especially from Himalayan villages, are the ones who are going to be affected or let's say impacted the most, and they're the most susceptible to climate related effects. And this sort of shows the intersectionality between climate change and coming from underprivileged backgrounds or communities. I'm sure Srishti will be able to elaborate a little bit on this. Um,
Yes.
Yeah, like Mohit said, it's all about having access, resources, and even choice in this matter. A lot of us in this call, I feel like if we wanted to avoid dusty roads, we could. If we wanted to wear disposable masks, we can buy it. But for a lot of people, that's just not an option. They're the ones who are going to suffer. So, are we willing to turn a blind eye to that just because we don't probably have to deal with the circumstance right now? And if we blow up that into global scale, then US and China, they're the ones maybe emitting a lot of more pollution than Nepal is, and they could turn a blind eye, but they can't right now. So even us as individuals, we need to be more conscious about what we do, because we are in a place of privilege, and we need to understand that we do have that privilege, and we're not helpless in this. There are things we could do for the vulnerable communities. So, for example, Mohit was talking about women in the rural Himalayan regions being affected. Women, girls are responsible for bringing drinking water home, right? In those big, I don't know what they call it in Kaito. So, if water sources dry out, how much are they going to walk? How much more are they going to walk? That's going to be an issue. Higher temperatures would mean maybe more mosquitoes, definitely. So that means more diseases and more spread of diseases. We can afford mosquito coils, we can afford all out. But again, people in villages, not so much. So we cannot turn a blind eye just because we don't suffer these consequences. We can't be short-sighted, I feel, and that's really important. One more thing I'm going to add is about in Nepal. Majority of our population depends on agriculture, and particularly subsistent agriculture, which is their primary source of income, primary source of food. But then, like I showed in the slides, water source, crop yield, all of that is definitely going to go down, regardless of how much we emit, Nepal emits into the
Yeah.
atmosphere, because air pollution is not going to stick to political boundaries. So we need to be even more vigilant and more vocal about these issues, especially because we're the ones who are not the ones creating all these emissions.
Yeah. Definitely. I mean, it is true that climate change is going to disproportionately affect the vulnerable communities, but I think it will also give us a kind of enthusiasm to address those concerns of theirs. And information is the first thing. So thank you so much for those responses. Now, I realized that Shushi spoke about air pollution in her presentation. I think when we talk about climate change in Nepal, the topic that really takes all the limelight, and rightly so, is air pollution. I mean, of course, Nepal is notorious for its worsening air quality. We see it all over the news. Uh, but what do you think is happening, and why aren't we seeing any change, even though it's so, I mean, like it's famous and it's all over the news, like I said? Why isn't things happening? Why aren't things happening? Shushi, maybe you'd want to start this off.
Yeah, sure. Like I mentioned earlier, 35 to 37,000 Nepalis die every year due to diseases born from air pollution. And another piece of information that might be scary but informative to us is that our average life expectancy is reduced by at least 4 years. People who live in Kathmandu, Chitwan, and parts of Tarai, just because of the poor quality of the air. Major factors of air pollution, these are things we see all the time in the news. It's old motor vehicles that have bad emissions, road construction, we have wood fire burning, or just garbage burning that we see a lot in the winters in Nepal, and brick kilns, and we are having forest fires right now too. These are all factors that contribute to the air pollution, but the reason why it's not being curbed is because no one is doing anything to curb it. And this is even worse because I don't know if you all know about Mexico City. Mexico City has a huge air quality problem. So Mexico City is it's built on the crater of a dead volcano. So it's like bowl shaped and it's covered on 3 sides. And what happens, and it's in a higher elevation. And so what happens is that because of the lack of airflow and also the high elevation, for example, vehicles, when they combustion engines work, fuel is not used effectively, and that leads to even more production of CO2, which is then trapped into the city itself, and that leads to a lot of air pollution. And if we use that example and look at Kathmandu Valley is in a similar situation. We are higher elevation, not as much as Mexico City, but we are higher, and we are covered on a lot of our, like the Himalayas cover around us. That's the whole point of a valley, and that means that it's going to just be worse for us compared to other places, just because of how our topography is. Um, it is, Steve. That's just how our geography led to us being unfortunate in that aspect. But then we have benefits of that in monsoons and all of that. But yeah, that's one of the reasons I believe this air pollution issue is not going to go away anytime soon. The government doesn't care. They're not doing anything about it. Mexico City took a lot of measures,
Yeah.
and they're still suffering, but they took a lot of measures to curb this. And yeah, and we're having more and more forest fires. Mananko, I already talked about it, and it's just going to get worse and worse. Mo, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, let me talk about something that I wrote a couple of months ago. This piece where basically, so what the Curriculum Development Center, the CDC of Nepal, did when they published their national curriculum framework in 2076 was they made health, population, environment, as we know it, HPE, this subject is optional for secondary level as opposed to its compulsory status, right? Obviously, this subject taught people about students about health and population and so many aspects around it, but it also taught them about environmental concepts, including the basics of environment, climate change, sustainability, and everything around it. So while the entire world was taking steps to actually, have climate solutions, even United States recently joining the Paris Agreement again, taking a step forward for environment and its preservation. I think Nepal took a major step back when the whole education system made, the HPE subject is optional. And because of this, we've seen a lot of things ranging from, increase of cardiovascular diseases, organ damages, water shortages, mass migration, respiratory disease, especially in Kathmandu, irregular rainfalls and stuff like that. And this might not be directly related to, it's people might not be able to see the association with education, but we know it's linked, right? And let me talk about this infamous example. I think when I talk about climate activists, a lot of people will know about the Nijgar airport. Obviously, from an economic standpoint, from a tourism standpoint, it's very lucrative, right? And we're spending, I think, around 3.4, $3.5 billion on it. But this is coming at a cost of about 2.4 million trees, more than 500 species of birds, more than 30 species of mammals, and so many more floras and faunas, right? Uh, and we're taking up projects like this, and then we're complaining, oh, it's feeling very hot. It's raining at a most randomest of times. Uh, yeah, it's as simple as that, right? Like we're doing a few things to amend climate solution, but at the same time, we're taking a lot of steps back and falling in the same circle where we're not doing enough as a country. And then, I don't think the government really cares, just like Srishti said. So go ahead, Sadiksha.
Thank you, Mohit. I mean, I'm smiling, but of course, it's a very grim issue. And to know that, it's affecting us and to also know that nothing is being done, I think that's the worst thing. But I'm just going to take this thing that Mohit said about US, right? How the new president has joined the climate accord and really put our hopes high for climate crisis. And now, if we kind of zoom out on climate change and view it from the global lens, we see a lot of people who don't even believe in the science of climate change, right? Even though there is a 97% consensus among climate scientists that humans are the cause of global warming, we have climate deniers. In Nepal, we have also people who are not bothered at all, and those who think it's not their business. It's just like, people who are in the environment fields. What are your thoughts, and also if you have any suggestions for these people? I know it was a very long question, but yeah, maybe Mohit or Shashi. Mohit, if you want to start off. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think this is related to the previous question or the answer what I gave around education of how people simply are not aware of it and the government making moves of, making important subjects optional tells us a lot about why people are unaware or think climate change is a myth. I have a friend who actually thinks climate change is a myth and is actually believing in it. Initially, I thought he must be joking, but probably not, right? So I was reading a lot on climate deniers. There was this book called The New Climate War. I think this was written by this person called Michael Mann, who's a very famous environment activist, and he was famously known for the hockey stick graph that shows the global temperature since the dawn of industrial era. And I think this became famous because this was also used in The Inconvenient Truth, the movie, the incredibly impactful movie, right? So this person, Michael, was, a person heavily advocating for everything like the climate change and the consequences and how we should change. But there were a lot of people, sort of attacking him, and his emails got hacked. The government was investigating him, and he also received threats to stop his work and stuff like that. And obviously, he suggested that this was being done to discredit his work, probably by the fossil fuel companies, because they were the ones getting affected because of climate change and all the consequences of it. And this is a whole, like, I was also reading how Greta Thunberg was being criticized for being an activist and not studying at this young age. So people have weird conceptions, and like they're, so many things are going on in their head. And I think it's a big war that we're facing with disinformation, especially in this social media era. So obviously, when I think about climate deniers, there is a group of people who just think climate change is a myth because of lack of information, lack of awareness, or they might just belong to this secret conspiracy theorist group, right? But there's also another group of people who work for the interest of those people or companies would be impacted
Mhm.
by climate solutions, right? And try to discredit all the work that scientists and people like Michael Mann or Greta Thunberg are doing. I'm sure Srishti will be able to
Right.
elaborate a little bit on it.
Yeah, just to add to that, I have some numbers here. So the five biggest publicly traded oil and gas companies in the US spend more than $200 million to push denialism. Like that's what they spend that money on. And
Mhm.
there's another thing where um, there is a family foundation that spent more than $145 billion funding groups that oppose climate action. So we shouldn't be swayed by people who have these agendas. We think it's important to actually look at the facts. And
Mhm.
Sadiksha, you mentioned right about um, uh, scientists saying that climate change is not real, but then
Yeah.
it's not just. Can you talk about that a little bit because it's interesting?
Okay. Yeah. So we had our discussion today in the afternoon, and we're talking about the, like the deniers. And I had done this online course, the science of climate. Yeah, something I forgot the course. It was a long time back, but anyway, in that there were, how these climate change deniers, they, like cherry pick information. They pick things that, is really good to them, like you both have already mentioned, like, just maybe like perpetuating or just continuing their own agendas. So I think that was one thing. And the other thing was, a lot of times these climate deniers also tell people that, even scientists don't agree to that. But what is the general consensus among climate scientists and not general scientists? 97% of climate scientists agree to climate change and agree to the impacts that have been made by humans. So the things that they really, cherry pick and say that the scientists are not really approving, those are general scientists. Those are not scientists who have actually researched in climate change. So that was one thing that was something that I found out through the course. Yeah.
So, Diksha, one more thing I wanted to add is that in
Mhm.
Nepal, not so much in saying that there are climate deniers, but people
Yeah,
who just don't
exactly.
think climate change is an issue.
Hmm.
Uh, Even like people like my parents, and they're like, what about people who are hungry, who are starving,
Yeah.
disease, all of that?
Right.
Why should we not consider that? Why should we think about climate change, which is in the future? But what they don't realize is that it's not two separate problems.
Yeah, and it's
Climate
not a
change
far
is
off problem.
taking
Yeah,
over that problem and making it even bigger. And
definitely.
that's something that we need to communicate to people. I don't think people realize that it's not two separate issues. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, I think that's something that we would need to also tell people, who do not really feel that climate change is something that they have to take up. I mean, it's going to affect us all in the end. But something that, I mean, of course, the presentation that you both put was really good. It was alarming, but it was also really heartening to see the change in perceptions, as well as a change in efficiency and cost of renewable energy. I think that was a very good highlight. The United Kingdom, Japan, and the Republic of Korea, together with so many other countries, have pledged carbon neutrality by 2050, and China has pledged that to get before 2060. So, amidst all these promises and technological advancements, how have perceptions and use of renewable energy changed, especially in Nepal? Yeah, maybe, yeah. Shrishti, you'd want to start off.
Yeah, I'll just start.
Sure.
So I think what's really important in Nepal specifically, and that's something we talked about in our climate reality training also, is that you can't um, ask people to adopt these technologies, these like renewable energy. You can't just say that it's good for the planet, so use it. People are not gonna want that, especially if it's a underdeveloped or developing country. You need to you need to see where the things that matter to them, like cost. Cost, if it's cost effective, if like those wood fired cooking things, those make people cough, and they think that okay, these biogas stoves are not making me cough so much, and the consequence is that they feel better, but also another long-term consequence is that they're fighting climate change in their own small way. That's something really important. Even with EVs, if you want to talk about EVs out here, people didn't buy EVs like last year or the year before because they were like, oh, gotta save the planet. It was
Yeah.
because of the low taxes and low
Mhm.
customs. People wanted to save on money, but then the consequence was that they used it and they realized, oh, it's really good, and then people slowly started adopting. And I think that's really important in countries like Nepal, where people will adopt good technology, good sources of energy, but there has to be benefits other than just saying it's about climate change. That's really important. Mo, do you want to add
Yeah.
to it?
Um, I think there is a big perception change recently in the world, even in Nepal. Like, I think, especially in Nepal, it's because people have started feeling climate change. The temperature is going
Yeah.
high. We're seeing more mosquitoes.
Mm.
It's dusty around here. Kathmandu being one of the most polluted cities in the world. So facts like those or things like those, I think that's because of which people are actually accepting climate change and probably more readily available to actually make a conscious effort to change it, right? Even in the presentation, I talked a little bit about Britain back in 1956 when
Yeah.
they thought,
Mhm.
you know, a Britain without coal was not possible at all.
Mhm.
But very recently, they said that they had a coal-free time energy production for almost 2 weeks, and that is great, right? And I even talked about solar and wind energy, which has been produced at a greater rate than anyone had predicted, and even in terms of cost, it has been cheaper than expected, which is incredible, right? And they've been surpassing coal and gas to produce new electricity, which has been very positive transition that people did not see coming, especially coming this soon, right? And
Yeah.
just like you mentioned, Sadiksha, countries like Japan, Korea, UK, and I
Mm.
think 110 more countries have pledged
Great.
to go carbon neutral by 2050.
Mhm.
China to be following that by 2060, right?
Great.
I'm just trying to tie this with Nepal because
Mm.
Nepal has been like even during the end of the presentation, I suggested that Nepal is nowhere near
Yeah.
the Paris agreements, right? And we've been making very slow progresses, right? We take a step forward, but on the other end, we take two steps back, which is such a frustrating thing, right? And we have been creating climate mitigation policies, but I'm not sure about the implementation
Mhm.
process, right?
Mhm.
And I think it will take us a lot to reach the Paris agreements by 2030, especially in terms of energy and transportation sectors, right? Just I just wanted to touch a little bit about the COVID situation because it is still so recent, right? The the emission in Nepal shrunk majorly, right? But still, during this pandemic, at one point, Kathmandu was one of the most polluted cities in the world. That is such a crazy information to know, right? Like, despite the pandemic, when everything was at a pause, emissions were at the minimal. Kathmandu, became the top for something that we never expected to, right? So I think a big perceptional change is needed, where Nepal needs to, quickly act. Again, just like I mentioned, not some point in the future, because we are running out of time. It has to be right now when we, act towards creating solutions.
Yes, definitely. Thank you, Mohit and Srishti. Um, Before I move on to other questions, we have questions from the audience, so maybe we'd want to address that first. So we have Pratik asking, I think this is for Srishti, a common vein of argument is the economic one. Industrial revolution precipitated both economic and climate change for the Western world. Developing countries like China and India, which are major climate change actors right now, rightfully ask what right do these Western nations have to ask them to purposefully retard their economic advancement at the cost of polluting the environment the very same way the West did centuries ago. We'd love to hear more on this.
And Pratik, that's a good question.
Yeah, and I think that's
There
a
is
common
no
question that we keep on hearing. Yes, Shrishti.
yeah, and there's no solution. There's no answer to it that works out. Because there's arguments on both sides. It's just about how willing are we to work together as human beings rather than being from Nepal or China or
Yeah,
India or the US. It depends on that. And I don't know. I can't talk for the human species on how willing we are to work together with each other. So it's a good question. It's a good question to think about from both perspectives, but I don't think I can give um, an answer per se because it's just I
yeah.
don't think it's possible.
No, I just want to like add something to this. I know Mohit wants to go maybe, but I just wanted to add because this conversation has been started. I think I'd like to link this to a metaphor that climate change is something that is, like a ship that is sinking. And it does not really matter who put the holes there first. It's going to sink. So it all depends on how well you take actions. I mean, at the end of the day, you might as well sink. So what are you going to do about it, right? So maybe Mohit, if you want to add anything.
No, I think very quickly what I wanted to think is like say, just like Srishti mentioned, is that right now, rather than thinking about, Nepal and China and this and that, right, we have to think from a global perspective. We have to think about the present and also think about the future of all the decisions that we are making or all the conscious effort or everything that is necessary. And that has to be made not as a country, not as a continent, but it has to be made as a global community because whatever decisions we make right now, be it for economic advancement or whatever, right, it will have implications in the future. It's our kids who are going to see that, right? They might not even have a safe space to live, right? They might have to, live in a different planet if that is possible, right? So yeah, again, something very interesting to think about, but the most simplest thing I would suggest is to think from a global perspective, keeping economy and money probably in the background.
Political debate, yeah. Thank you. Any other questions from the audience?
Something I wanted to add that Mohit, you and I forgot to mention is that Mohit and I are not climate change experts. We're just climate change enthusiasts, and we want to know more about it. And the
I think
Climate
that's the
Reality
first step,
Project,
definitely.
yeah, it's we wanted to educate ourselves more, and that's what the project makes you do. It makes you research, it makes you question, it makes you see everything that's happening very realistic terms now, and
Yep.
makes you then want to act for it. So, although we did a lot of research for this. What we're trying to push people to do is not to learn just from us, but to learn yourselves to do your own research. There is a lot of research, even Nepal based. So
Yep.
we want to highly encourage that you research on your own.
Yep. Any other questions from the audience?
Mohit, we killed it. We nailed it. All the questions are
Yeah.
answered.
You did not even have to like raise your hand. I mean, sorry, you not even have to chat it out. Maybe you can just raise your hand and unmute yourself if you are in a noise-free background. I think even that would be okay.
Yeah. Really quickly, the presentation, if you all joined later or something, Mohit, Shubhangi, and I have done a really detailed presentation on this.
Hmm.
It's on YouTube, so I'm sharing the link here on the chat. So if you
Yeah.
really want to watch what we said in the first 5-10 minutes of the session, but in longer and more detail, then I think you can watch that later. Bhushan?
Yeah, so we have a question. Any positive evidence or indicators that Nepal has taken? Mohit, maybe you
Mohit,
want
I
to,
think Mohit can do this.
yeah, Mohit can take this,
Uh,
maybe.
so the most recent and the infamous one I could remember was the EV tax raise, right? At one point, there was when the budget was released, announced, there was this huge debate on that crazy amount of taxes that was, being pushed for the electric vehicles. Obviously, the government had to be forced into it, but one of the positive things, or let's say indicators, was the taxes were brought down. Obviously, I would still think that needs to be controlled by a huge margin, but that probably is one of the indicators where EVs could be and again, taking lessons from Norway, where 60% of their new cars were electric. Probably Nepal can take notes from that as well. But I was also hearing, like, this is not exactly an evidence, but I was also hearing that the CDC might reinstate HPE as the compulsory subject.
Oh, wow,
Again,
that is a good.
it's just something that I was hearing, but I think education is so important, and we can also talk about climate deniers or people with less information or
Hmm,
you know
hmm.
awareness about climate issues. But education is pivotal, right? So we have to start from there in order to build the next generation to survive it. But I think Sadiksha or Srishti, if you want to add, please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, agreeing to everything that you've said, and hopefully, like, I just have like huge hopes that CDC does implement it, and not only CDC, but there are so many things that Nepal has been doing. Nepal submitted the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, which are at the heart of the Paris Agreement, and really helps countries fulfilling their long-term goals related to Paris Agreement. Nepal submitted a really good document, and very early so. However, there has been, a lot of talks and regarding its implementation. So we are taking a step forward. If we have the right technical capacity, we work on the having that kind of capacity as well as people, we will definitely get there. So I think that's one of the positive things that we can look forward to. um, we have, I think, another question from Sachit. Maybe I'll just read it out. Interesting to hear about. Okay, what exactly are they funding to push the climate change denial agenda? So this is regarding the climate deniers that we had talked about. Have you found anything that's worth sharing? Okay, all right. I think Srishti did share a few things, but maybe Srishti would want to elaborate on those.
So I can't tell you in detail because even I haven't looked into it in that much detail. But what I can do is I will share the Climate Reality Facebook page with you. If you follow them, if you follow the West page, and if you follow Climate Reality, every day in your feed while you're scrolling through social media, you'll just see information like this. And I feel like that's how I've kind of educated myself more than actively researching. It's kind of passive research. And so, Sachit, I'll send you the link to that page and then you can look into it more.
Yeah, so we also have the new climate uh, war, and it talks a lot about climate change deniers. So maybe you want to also read that up. Any more questions before we move forward? All right. Uh, I think we've given a lot of food for thought for everyone in the audience, hopefully. Uh, so before we end, I just had one more question to Mohit and Shrishti. Um, the climate reality training like really sounds great. I wanted to be a part of it, but because of my conflicting schedule, I could not be a part of it. I regret it so much. I hope I can join in 2021. I'm sure it must have been a transformational one for both of you. Can you please like share the impact the training has made on your personal or maybe professional life, or like just generally, what was the impact that it made on you as a person, as an individual who wants to fight climate change and who wants to take that responsibility against climate change?
Srishti, do you want to go or should I?
No, you can go. You
Okay.
can go.
Um, I
Yeah, we'll
think,
keep it brief so that
yeah, I'll keep it
we
very
get time. Yeah,
short.
yeah, sure.
I'll keep it very short, right? Like the
Yeah.
climate reality project was so powerful in some stages. Like obviously, it gave me a big perceptual change, but I could see a lot of behavioral change as well, like in my personal life, in my house, in my family, and even professionally at my workspace, we've been actually doing things that I was only thinking about, right? And the whole, the Climate Reality Project is also supporting us to create a Green Shaper curriculum that we will be,
Yeah.
implementing in schools, which is such a great experience, right? And apart from being, a great, an eye opener while going through the presentation that Algo was presenting to us, I think I've always been, sort of passionate about climate issues and how we can create environmentally sustainable
Mhm.
solutions. But just to see and meet people worldwide who are passionate about this, and even meet people in Nepal. I think I see Rashtra here in the conversation, who was also very
Yeah.
passionate. So
Mhm.
just to meet people with similar ideas, similar views, it just is such a positive thing, right? And one very quick final thought that I learned was climate change is not something that is the end point. Like, we definitely can overcome it, but we need to act right now in the most sensible and effective manner. And that's something I learned. Srishti, do you want to add?
Yeah, that to add to Mohit's point about just not just meeting these people, we have a network of people. We have WhatsApp groups. We can communicate with people.
Yeah.
People from all over the world now who are doing amazing things. And a big part of just being a climate reality leader is being someone who's vocal about climate change in just their regular lives. That's something that's happened to me. I just talk about climate change much more than I used to. Going into the training, I don't know what to expect, but definitely it's something that we should all be talking about more often, more frequently in our normal lives. It shouldn't be just a topic that we listen to like in these sessions and then
Yeah.
stop thinking about it. I
Exactly.
think that's what climate reality. And another thing I already mentioned was researching about climate change. That it really pushed me to do so. We had to write papers about. Mohit hated that. We had to write papers about climate change issues and then solutions that Nepal is implementing. So that at that time it was kind of annoying to write it, but it also gave us a way to research about Nepal and what we are doing to combat climate change. So in that way, it was really good. Plus, Al Gore is super chill. He's a really great guy, and him training us
Yeah.
was cool. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think Sadiksha and everyone in this conversation, you have to attend the Climate Reality Project in 2021, because
If
it
it's
is just
and
so
it's free,
powerful.
probably. If
Yeah.
it's online, it'll be free. So like, why not?
Wait, did Sadiksha freeze?
Yeah, I think she froze. Um, so I think the next thing would be to do the closing polls, right?
Yeah,
Sachit, do you do?
Sachit.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi.
We're doing the polls, Sadiksha. She's gone again.
I'm so sorry. I don't know. My network just switched. I'm really sorry about that. Yes. So we're just doing the polls again, and I'll also tell you what exactly the right answers are. I think after this informative session, you all will get the right answers, but just in case. All right. Okay. What is the average temperature of the Earth's surface as of 2020? Yes, it is 14 to 15 degrees Celsius, 57 to 60-degree Fahrenheit. So that is the right answer. Only 20 to 30% of the population in Nepal have access to water and sanitation. And the fifth question, a degree temperature increase at the
Mm,
equator will often be 3 times as much in the Arctic. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Mohit and Srishti, for the wonderful session.
thank you. It was really
Thank you.
nice
It was,
talking
yeah.
about climate change. Yeah, good
Oh, am
opportunity
I
once
audible?
you.
Oh my God.
I think
Am I audible
Sadiksha,
now?
yes, you
You're
are,
okay.
but right before Or that you
Okay.
thanked both of us, so that's great.
It's okay.
I just want to just yeah,
Yeah,
I just have to yeah. Anyway, I hope I'm audible right now. Thank you both for attending the climate reality training and
if anyone has questions about the climate reality training, if you want to do it, you can just send a message in our Facebook page or Insta, anywhere, or just me if you have my contact details, or Mohit or Sadiksha, and then we can let you know more in detail about it.
Yes. And before we end, I think the moment I speak, my internet just goes off. Okay, I think I'm audible now.
You are,
I
Sadiksha.
just want to end with
Nope, nope, Sadiksha, it's not there. Mohit, do you want to just wrap things up?
Yeah, should I be thanking ourselves on behalf of
Yes.
Sadiksha? Yeah, so thank you, Srishti. Thank you to myself, right? Sadiksha froze, technical difficulties, apologies for that. But thank you all for attending. We really hope you learned a little bit, but just like Srishti mentioned earlier, we basically wanted to talk a little bit about climate, but we're not experts, but we are passionately trying to learn new things about what we can do, how we can make things better, right? So with this, Sadiksha is back. Sadiksha, I was just doing your speech by myself, but please take over.
I'm really sorry. I don't know what is going on. I really have to do something about my internet. I don't know why it goes off during the ELS. Anyway, I just wanted to end the session by telling you all about the takeaways that I've had from the session. I think the one takeaway is that uh, no matter what we do, of course, like took the a metaphor of a sinking ship, climate reality is here. And if I have to take the two words from today's session, it would be climate and reality. It is a reality, and it is something that's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to be there. And if we really want to address it as people, as conscious human beings, and people who are educated, I think the only thing we can do is to act as a global community. And I'm happy that Global Shapers has given us this platform, have brought us all together, and I hope we continue to do the great things that we are doing. Uh, so I just want to thank you all for attending the session. Thank you for sticking with us throughout. I feel that we've already completed the poll questions. I was a bit, yeah, my internet was not very stable, so I did not uh, get to stay till the end of it, the whole poll thing. Thank you again, and please follow our social media pages for more information as well as updates on the next sessions. Bye bye, guys, and have a good night.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Okay, is it just us?
Guys, that was good. That
Okay.
was very good.
Oh, phew.
Awesome.